Thanks, Ajay, for the very
Yes.
kind introduction. And it is truly an honor to meet all of you here today because I work closely with the young rheumatology organizations in Asia. And after I moved to England, I'm also working closely with EMUNET, that is European Young Rheumatologists. So I feel especially for young researchers and professionals, and it is even more heartwarming to see some of familiar faces in the audience. So Jasmine and Prabjot. So yeah, as Ajay said, I'm a rheumatologist, consultant rheumatologist in Wolverhampton, and my academic base is Manchester. And since you are all neurologists, some of you may be myologists, in case anyone is. So IMAX is a NIH-led myositis collaborative group where I serve as the mentorship lead. And as Ajay rightly said, research, ethics, and study design is often an unexplored and under taught area. And we end up becoming specialists and even going to subspecialisms, heavily into research, but oftentimes we uh, feel that there is a knowledge gap in how to conduct research or in the ethical considerations of research. And today, hopefully, we'll talk a bit about those. I do not have any disclosures, and I'm assuming most of you are from this region. So I'm going to try to base some examples that may be relevant to your region. So my journey with surveys really happened by chance, I'd say, because during COVID, we had some of us had a lot of time. We were on ICU rotas, but rest of the time clinics were cancelled, and there was no real way to contact patients. You could only do it online, and we were worried. Being in a tertiary care center, there were so many patients who came long distances as to how they were doing and how to communicate what they should do, because there were lots of fears and concerns that our patients had. And we'd all agreed that the post-pandemic world is more connected than ever. For young researchers, this is an added advantage because you're motivated, enthusiastic, want to do things at a fast pace. And oftentimes your senior colleagues might tell you, oh, things don't happen at that pace. In our days, things were different. You feel sometimes a generation gap or you want to do a lot. So I feel like digital is the word for you. And it's a really rapidly exploring area, especially with the advent of LLMs now, which is a new frontier in research. So maybe at some point we're doing some work on that, and the next couple of years we can talk about that as well. So today's learning objectives in the next 30 to 40 minutes are how to conduct high quality and valid survey-based studies. And as a young researcher, you may be interested in how to publish in high impact journals. So it really depends on the research question, how well it is framed, and what clarity you have. And simplicity is key. Novelty matters as well, because surveys sometimes depends on how you design it, but they may not be the most robust form of research. So design and methods are important. Sampling techniques are very important. If it's a closed group sampling where you know what is the number that didn't respond and what are the characteristics of the population that did not respond versus responded. So then you can compare and you know what are the biases in your study design. If your study is actively seeking out some people who may want to answer these surveys or may have recall bias, then there is an inherent flaw in design. But there are ways to address this, even with survey-based research. Then, of course, writing matters as well, and how you design your paper and what format you choose. So if it is a weak study design, you could go in as a letter in a top journal. So sometimes you can downsize that way, less words, as we say, less is more. And we'll go through a few examples to touch on each of these. So for those of you who are here today and still wondering why, this is important, um, and then how can we do it and how shall we start? I think for many of us, when we start off an early career, the question is, how do I start with research? Because I don't have my own data. And the data may belong to your parent cohort, which is housed under senior colleagues. You may not feel comfortable tapping into that resource, or you are told that you have to start and build something of your own. And big data is really the way forward if you want to do anything meaningful. So it's an efficient means with a wider reach, and you can collect data from a large number. And for those of you who also play with laboratory research, laboratory is higher cited, but then clinical is cited more quickly because in your journey as a researcher, citations are what take you up. So it's more balance in life. And I was a translational scientist, and I felt like in India, even importing some of the lab consumables took a fair amount of time. And the pace just did not depend on you. There were several rate limiting steps. So for such researchers to keep your motivation going, a good combination of clinical and laboratory research may be the way forward. And sometimes you may be in a situation where you don't really have contact with patients, or you don't have your own cohort. You're in a new job, or you are having a cohort which is not of your disease. And then we had the unique situation of being in a pandemic where none of us could see our patients or meet them. On occasion, there may be researchers just based out of somewhere. So this is a picture I took from my previous talk on research and social media. So this is an entirely new frontier in research, online research, social media based. And then rare diseases, it makes it even more important to tap into these modalities because it's just hard to access patients of these diseases. If you're not in a tertiary care center where you have a high volume of patients, you may not have adequate numbers to write a research paper. So I'm not sure of the exact prevalence. My medicine knowledge is now fading away, but I'm guessing myasthenia is not still a very common disease. Um, Among neurology related diseases, then immune checkpoint inhibitor syndromes, these are not that common. There may be other autoimmune neurogenic syndromes. If you're doing patient-reported surveys, then you have to be careful and choose diseases that do not impact cognitive abilities, because otherwise it'll be unreliable. So this is one of the first surveys that I designed during COVID, and that's how my journey started. And I was asked more and more to design surveys. Then I had to get deeper into the science and learn from experience, and learned from designing and co-designing several studies with colleagues. Uh, this was mainly a few of my mentors based in the West wanted to understand what are the concerns of patients with myositis during COVID. There were widespread lockdowns and we didn't know what to do. So we approached patients of the Myositis Association in America and Myositis UK and Australia. And then I had some myositis patients in India whom we approached, and we designed the survey to understand their concerns. As you see, we got a fair number of respondents and understood that some of them were worried about myositis, but then COVID was the main concern in that time. And then there were confinement-related issues. How do we continue care? We were quite surprised and pleasantly so to see that they were quite comfortable with video consultations, video or even audio visual. Even with email and messages, some proportion were okay. WhatsApp can't be used in the West due to GDPR regulations and IT protection, but in Asia and some countries, it is widely used. So people did prefer that. There was only a small proportion who really wanted to come. So science is changing. People like to be treated in the comfort of their homes. And just like banks have moved home, shopping centers are moving home. We're just doing everything on Amazon these days. So even healthcare is moving home, and it's important to understand what patient priorities might be and to, keep ourselves ready with those tools. So, survey-based research can be of various kinds. Qualitative synthesis is one. It's typically done with a sociologist or psychologist and people who are trained to conduct detailed interviews and then extract the recording and key elements from those. And these are often exploratory research to first frame the research question or understand what we can target for further exploration. For other kinds of survey-based research, which are not qualitative synthesis, you can make it more robust by having a control group. And then there are even longitudinal cohort surveys. Um, some of the health nutrition surveys in the US are key examples of this. If you know the OMOR Act, I'm sure there must be something like that in neurology. It's like outcome measures in rheumatology collaborative working group. So they design the core set outcome measures that should be important in trials. So they use a lot of surveys and include patients and qualitative synthesis to understand what will be the core set in outcome measures and trial reporting. Um, One of the great surveys available online, which is open access data, so you can literally download it with a few clicks, and you might like to explore it. It's mainly oncology based, but then it really captures information on several domains, digital literacy being one of those. So there are well-established surveys which can be a good starting point to understand how to design your study. What you should not do when you set out to design a survey, a very common mistake can be a double question. Like, did you find the classes you took during the first semester to be more demanding and interesting? Now, if someone says yes, you don't know if they were demanding or were they interesting. And then interesting can have a cultural context. Um, so interesting in England is not very positive, while interesting in other countries may be positive. So, so it's important to put things in context because there may be something that mainstream culture, but a lot of things are popular culture, high culture, subculture. It depends where you're floating a survey. If it's an online-based study, then you really need to keep your eyes out for those things. This is an example of a qualitative synthesis on patient views of steroid treatment. So the words that really came out were I am not explained about it. I feel powerless. I feel punished. My positive image is impacted. And then these could then be condensed into themes which are of relevance. And in clinical trial reporting, this becomes an important patient reported outcome to be captured because this is a surrogate for effectiveness of a drug. If adding on a drug is reducing steroid use and in turn is improving how the patient feels about themselves, then this can be a valuable secondary endpoint. So this is also a kind of survey-based study, but a qualitative synthesis. And usually these are more interview-based, but could be in writing as well. So if you set out to design your study, I'd say think big versus small. Like define the problem. Are you really defining it? Are you exploring? Like there are very big surveys, like the NANES and National Health Interview Survey. These have been published regularly in JAMA and NEJM. So it's not really a survey-based study, has to be a small one always. You can also think big. These are population levels. So again, the key thing is design and sampling strategy, because these have surveyed the entire population and then done so longitudinally over time. These were conducted by the government and had access to those kind of resources, which make them an extremely powerful and information tool over the decades. And even today, they continue to inform us about a lot of things. Um, You can also conduct a simple survey on a very controversial, but something that's important to patients and where there's a complete knowledge gap. This is my favorite example from last year. I was myself shocked to see a survey-based study published in Annals of Rheumatic Diseases, which I think now has an impact factor of 24 or something. But male fertility is important. And this study is from a well-established group in Netherlands who are known for their robust study designs. It was called the iFame study. And yes, we are going on prescribing methotrexate to men with inflammatory arthritis. It's very important to see if their fertility is impacted or not. So, so they performed a multi-center cross-section study, men with inflammatory arthritis 40 years or older, who said their family size were complete, were invited to participate. And then it was a questionnaire on fertility rate, and then they divided as per age. You see, it's been widely shared even on altmetrics. news, 15 news outlets, a lot of readers blogged as well. So it was clearly of public interest, and that is why the editor-in-chief of ARD would have taken it. So it's really good for exploring a hypothesis like this, because the study also challenged conventional notion where that fertility is not impacted, and it suggested that fertility is impacted. So it obviously became something which needs further investigation, because this would have a very widespread impact. Because inflammatory arthritis is one of the most common rheumatic diseases. So good research question, really carries some weightage. And then the advantages of digital surveys may be cost, because some of the survey tools may be free, or you may have university access to these. The flexibility, automation. If it's a patient-reported survey, you've totally done away with physician handling of it. And then you've totally done away with data cleaning to quite an extent, because the spreadsheets that are generated are very clean. And there are no errors in entries, and incomplete data can grade, just with a filter, you can clearly exclude them. It's fairly easy to do. If you are conducting a survey on a group that doesn't like to be identified and it's an anonymous survey, for example, if you want to talk about the queer community, then social desirability bias, so surveys might be better. And, and then there are suitable scenarios. Obviously, young people are a good target who spend a lot of time on social media. So that's like 25 to 35, or maybe even younger. If you're doing a study for under 18, you will need special ethical approvals, because the parent will be the person filling in the form generally. The ethical concerns with children filling it in. And then if you have a mailing list, that's again a suitable scenario. If someone doesn't want to be identified, like queer community or somebody else, drug addict, maybe, I don't know. So these can be suitable scenarios. And then you have matched non-responders to know what is the bias in your study. And then you have a control group, which you can do either by having healthy controls, or you can do PS matching, propensity score matching can be a good technique as well. Targeted sampling is an excellent way to go about it. So if you have, suppose you want to conduct a survey about the unmet needs of your community, then a survey would be great. This is a young, enthusiastic community who are literally connected online. We know the mailing list. It's very easy to send it out. We design the survey, validate it, pilot test it, and then we know what's the non-response rate. We can keep it open for a fixed period, send out adequate reminders, and then it's important to report in the paper how many did not respond. But you may have the baseline characteristics of the non-responders. And if there's no difference in the baseline characteristics of responder versus non-responder, then your study becomes stronger. So unsuitable scenarios, people who are underrepresented on the internet, if for digital surveys, privacy concerns, if they're illiterate, or if people are not proficient with the web-based tools. If an existing study has already validated key observations, or if you need like accurate data, it's, you don't want perception, you want hard outcomes which are recorded by a physician, it may not always be the best means. If you want to publish in high impact journals, you have to have robust methods and define the study population, estimate sample size, look at the sampling method, validation of the question, or use the already existing validated tool, because validation is tedious and needs a team and experience. But you can use validated tools that are already available. The thing to check will be if they're available in several languages, if you want a mixed community to be surveyed, and if they're free of cost, and if you need any special permissions to use them. And how good is the validation? How robust is it? Citations are a good metric. So if the paper was published 10 years ago and it's, got a lot of citations, that may be the validated tool. You can often write to these people and they respond quickly, and whether you can use it or not. You have to know your audience as well. So sometimes the surveys, the questions can be offensive to certain populations. For example, we are running a gender equity study in rheumatology, and to adapt it for global use, it had to be significantly edited. So there were some questions which were not acceptable, questions on sexuality and questions on bullying. So they were not acceptable to some regions or may not be conducive to certain religions. So you have to respect your audience, and you may have to open a separate collector or a separate link for specific regions where a few questions may be removed. Suppose you want to conduct a survey on the unmet needs for your society, then you could put in a validated scale. So if you want to understand the unmet needs for research, we are doing one such for AMUNET to include the validated self-efficacy scale, which already looked at the academic proficiency. But if you want to adapt it for research specifically, adaptations can be easy. Either search for validated adaptation, or if you are adapting it, then you will need more pilot testing and slight validation. And then see if translations are available, access, and digital versions. Like the quality of life surveys, the European one, digital versions need separate approvals from paper versions. So Ajay talked about the COVID study. Let's start with that example, how we started with the COVID study and why we went digital. If you wanted to look at the side effects of COVID vaccination, because during COVID, rheumatic disease patients really did not want to take the vaccine. They didn't feel safe. And physicians were not confident either. And this was obviously based on lack of data on this subject. And what are the side effects? If we were to go about a paper study, then it would take at least 6 months for data collection on 1,500 cases in 1 year. But if we went digital, then we use a cherries checklist, which was then the reference standard. But now we have a new checklist, as we'll see in a few minutes. Refined, pilot tested, it was an exception from review. Start meeting patients with rheumatic disease 20 to 30 per week, and then look for healthy controls. But with the online study, we converted this to an e-survey, used the same cherries checklist, introduced logic function. So if for different responses, there may be different questions seen. Like if you have myasthenia patients answering the survey and you want to include some questions which only they see, then they can be put in. Then vetting by experts, vetting by patients, vetting by students and lay public. So that makes your methodology strong, that you have adequately vetted it, pilot tested, include validated PROs. So that's half of the work done because you have used tools which have been validated by other groups and are free to use. And then collaborators from different locations may have access to patients from various countries, especially patient support groups. And then we included diverse specialties. That's how Ajay came into this, being a neurologist. So we thought we're focusing on the muscle. So why not have some autoimmune muscle syndromes? Gastroenterologist, because it was a survey on autoimmune diseases. So we could have Hashimoto's, other autoimmune diseases as well. And the PROMISE tool was validated by the NIH. So it was quite a well-established, robust tool. If you want to ask questions, so you have to be kind to the survey respondents. You have to be careful in what kind of questions you include. I've had like junior researchers including questions sometimes which can be come across. So you have to always at all times think that, okay, what may come across as offensive, because as a researcher, we can get overzealous in collecting data, and keep open-ended choices to the minimum, because then there'll be a lot of junk coming your way, which you may or may not be open to analyzing. And boring to completion. For example, this was a survey on misinformation during COVID that we conducted during the pandemic. And as you see, we said that you have to declare that you'll be using this for publication. This is anonymized, and for whom the survey is. Easy question first, which resources you use to find information on COVID, and then which resources you found misinformation. So pique their interest early on so they start engaging, because a lot of surveys sometimes start, what's your age, what's your name, what's your gender. They're very boring, and typically that you lose responses with that approach. There are studies that have established that. And close-ended responses, again, based on the granularity that you need. It can be dichotomous, Likert, or semantic differential. So all of these options are there in all the popular survey platforms. For open choices, um, again, you could put another this thing, because oftentimes there are people who are like, oh, I wanted to say something, but it was none of the options. So I get that a lot because it depends on the population. So for example, the gender-based study, gender differences, we had to adapt it for the Arab region. And then yesterday I had a collaborator tell me that, oh, it's only targeting the cis group and not the trans group. And as a man, I felt my problems, these were not problems important to me. Um, but in Japan, we got a lot of responses, but they came back saying, oh, none of the options were suitable. So I was forced to choose an option sometimes. So it's population specific as well, because I think, yeah, in Japan, the willingness to go to perfection and detail everything that comes into play. So they wanted more options. So global surveys can include a lot of, adaptation and revisions and being open to that. Consistency and clarity is important. You should not be ambiguous. So again, this cultural and language context comes in. Some same survey may require different wording in different regions. Like for the COVID survey, we found that using medications was okay, but if you use drugs, like sometimes we refer to medicines as drugs, which can carry, you know, imply something else in various countries. Pharmacies, again, is a terminology which is different in different countries. It can be chemist, pharmacy. I think there's something else as well. So sometimes including collaborators from various regions may be helpful just for that. And this was a question on my side, patient concerns, pharmacies closed and medicine. These two terms were revised many times because we had a British collaborator and an American collaborator, and they wanted to use different terms. And then measuring the impact of your respondents. So that is very important because you have surveyed people, but who are these people? So if it is a very small survey of just 50 people, but you say these are prolific researchers, how many years experience they have, how many prescriptions they've written, like hydroxychloroquine, if you want to survey people, they say how many prescriptions do you issue per week? How long have you followed these patients? And that becomes important, their opinion becomes suddenly more important. Or what is your citations or how many papers? If it's a survey on research ethics, then it becomes very important. You can compare that our respondents who had high citations were more aware of ethics, while those who didn't have were not aware. And then the power of exclusion, because like this adult physiological sleep study during COVID, if you want to look at the impact of confinement, then you ask them, have you been confined for 14 days? If they say no, just exclude them. The survey ends right there. Do you have a sleep disorder? You don't want to survey this population. So there it is. You just end it there and then. Do you take prescription pills? If yes, no, then fine. That ends it. So the power of exclusion can be very neatly applied with surveys. And there's several paid versions that can offer you further modalities. Quiz mode, logic function is particularly invaluable. So, and developing surveys and being able to play around with them online, I think that's a skill in itself, and it's worth looking at that. And Cherry's checklist is something you might want to look at. It is a previous guideline on how surveys should be conducted. Recently, the cross checklist has come up, so we'll go over it as well in a few minutes. So Cherry's predominantly said that look at the target population. Is it going to be convenience sampling, which most studies end up using, but can be simple, random, or stratified as well, which will make your study more robust. How can you reduce survey time? Close-ended questions, slider scale, easy on the eyes, layout can be important. Like matrix questions sometimes appear differently on the phone, so you have to specify, use a tablet. Logic function is very useful, one question at a time. And make sure it's not ambiguous. So the same person can't conduct, extensive pilot testing or validation. It has to be a group of people because people look at questions differently. And based on different levels of experience and specialism, they may be able to offer special advice. So face validity, content validity, external validity, these are all important aspects. And if you also go on recording the changes in your survey with the validation pilot testing, that itself can be a good protocol paper. So you say this was the initial version and this was the final version, and that goes into your supplementary method, then the editor-in-chief can see that you actually know what you're saying and you have done it. So evidence is important. Test, retext, grammar, syntax, wording, translations, all of it is important. And if it's a global survey, it has to have a wider geographic representation, maybe a steering committee who can help you. And for those who don't understand reliability and validity, you can see that this is neither reliable or not valid. Reliable, but it's not valid because it's an outlier, and this is reliable and valid. So for COVAD-1, we ended up with 18,000 respondents in 6 months. And that was with the help of several collaborators, more than 80 people worldwide. And you can see the wide geographic representation. And with COVAD-2, we managed to include some more of the underrepresented regions, more countries in Asia, more countries in Africa. Many countries in Africa still don't have a rheumatologist, so we were limited in our reach. And then South America as well. And this involved responses from 106 countries. And again, this one as well had 18,000. Eventually, we had more than 20,000 responses. So we ended up with a big data set where we're able to answer several research questions in various diseases. So we have, I think the group has published 27 papers so far, several more in writing. We do have a valuable 2 big data sets, and we do have some data on myasthenia gravis and some other neurology conditions, whatever Ajay collected might have been there. So if any of you are looking for, collaborating, you're most welcome to write to me. And the advantages of a digital study would be larger sample size, wider outreach, cost, time, and then stratified subset analysis. We had so many responses from so many countries in rare diseases, and we're able to answer important research questions. Patients feel assured that vaccines are safe. We even published on pregnancy and lactation and safety of vaccines during that, during COVID. And I've had patients who had already read my papers when they came to me, and they had specific questions. Especially a patient was diagnosed with lupus, and she said, "You have published on short-term safety of vaccines after 7 days. What about long-term?" And I was like, "Okay, that paper is submitted. It will be online soon." So it is nice to see that, it makes an impact to patients and disease-specific data, because most of the studies will have more general data. So that's the power of stratification. And there are biases. So with sampling, good sampling techniques, you can minimize that. There can be a recall bias. So that is something you can't avoid. But if it's physician reported, then it may be better. But then how does the physician record it is very important, because people are busy. So I personally feel like patient reported might be slightly better in that regard. Or do a collateral survey, patient and physician both fill. So that is our model for some of the future COVID projects. Writing, it's very important how you choose to write. Like we published a paper on post-COVID syndrome. It was very timely because you should know your data. There was no data on rheumatic diseases and long COVID from a big data set. We knew this is a literature gap and we had to publish it quickly. We drafted it as a letter and Lancet Rheumatology took it. So that can be an important technique. Time is of the essence, and all editors are looking for new information which has high citation potential. Methods have to be very detailed, but there may not be enough words, so just push them in the supplement, but signpost to these supplementary material in the main text. So these are the final 10 steps to creating a great survey. Define the purpose, keep it short and focused, question simple, close-ended, and keep them consistent. If it's a rating scale question, poor quality of life questions all on the left, so they don't have to make too much of an effort moving their finger to the right to, click on it. And then logical ordering, pre-tested. And consider your audience, consider sending several reminders. There's a lot of survey fatigue now, so people don't really want to take surveys. So this wonderful paper that came online recently, it's called CROSS, which is consensus-based checklist for reporting of survey-based studies. And the first author is a student from UCMS. And the last author is, I think, Iran and Canada. So they have discussed, this is endorsed by the Equator Network. that lays down guidelines for any kind of reporting, be different kinds of research, RCT or cohort studies, etc. So they say that the Cherries checklist was drafted in 2004, and after that, there was another group that worked on some guidelines, but the Cherries checklist didn't have a systematic literature review, and the next one that came out in 2014 did not follow it up with a Delphi round. So when guidelines are designed, you need to have a systematic literature review and a Delphi round with experts. And this group followed that methodology, as you can see, and there was 70% was the bar for agreement, and whatever didn't hit the bar was revised and then went through 3 rounds of revision. And going over them quickly, your title should include survey. Your abstract should clearly mention the study design. Okay, background and objective is fine. You would normally do it. Data collection, number of sections, number of questions. So you have to be very detailed in the design of the survey. And it's ideal, I would say, to just publish the protocol if it's a big online survey that you're conducting with a big study group, then that saves words because you wouldn't have that many words in the paper to put in. So I always make it a point to publish the protocol separately and report the target populations. That is very important. Acknowledge those groups. If there are specific groups who endorse the survey and share it with their networks, they should be mentioned. Scoring and classification procedure, all the references of, if you are embedding several scales, then references of those, maybe a table of all the validated scales you're including. Information on testing the questionnaire, how many rounds of revisions. And if you can have a table of pre and post, that would be great. The questionnaire should be fully provided. And you describe the study population, location, eligibility criteria, who were excluded. A workflow chart is very important. Sampling technique, was it convenient, snowball, targeted? So targeted is the best one, where you have a mailing list or a closed group, so you know how many did not respond. Because any surveys with less than 75% responses are usually considered to be of weak design, unless you can compare the baseline of the non-responders with responders. And then describe how representative the sample is of the study population. That is, again, comparing non-responders. Provide information on modes of questionnaire administration. Was it digital? Did the physicians assist the patients in filling the survey? So if there are regional differences in how they responded, it may be due to one of these factors. And then how did you minimize errors in human entry if it is non-digital? So that's where I think digital may be slightly better. And were you interviewing people? Did you select them? Was it selected targeting, targeted sampling? So that is important. IRB approvals. Some countries you don't even need an approval. Some you require an exemption. So that has to be specified. Data handling, confidentiality. Did you delete the IP address? Who has the data? Is it available on public request? The statistical methods. If you modified any variables, so some questions probably talked about something and then you inferred something from that, like the patient said, oh, I have swollen joints. Now you calculated a patient disease activity score based on that. So you have to describe that in detail in the methods. And that will be a very important component of your survey methodology. How was a missing data handled? So that is, was imputation done, not done? How non-response error was addressed. Again, if you compare with non-responders, that addresses it. Longitudinal surveys, how was loss to follow-up addressed? Like with the nanny surveys, they would even post letters, or someone would then go there to the house to check if the address has changed. So you know exactly why have they not responded, or if there's a new address, then it is redirected there. So that is why these surveys are more robust. Indicate whether any methods such as weighing of items or PS have been used to adjust for non-representatives. Sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis to remove the effect of confounders. So these are advanced statistical techniques that you can apply to improve and clean your results and interpretation of these. Flow diagram. And then what else? An adjusted estimate. So these are more statistics, again, advanced statistics as well as routine statistics, but sensitivity analysis is important. What are the biases? How have you interpreted things? For example, we did a paper on a patient versus physician disparity in disease assessment. So there was no physician assessment. We assessed, the surrogate was change in medications. So that's an important bias in the study, and you have to address it. And you say, but however, there is no data on this. So this is really the first exploratory study. And then it becomes important despite that limitation, that in future there will be a study which will record data from patients and from physicians. And this is really the building block for that. And then acknowledgements are important, funding, conflicts of interest, external validity, like clinical trial reporting pretty much. And caution is very important in your conclusion and limitations in surveys. If you want to read further, this is an article we wrote during COVID, and then the cross paper are two things I'd recommend. This is a diagram that lists what you can do and how you can plan your study. In the next phase of COVID, we are exploring different themes like subjective well-being, social support, diet, equity. I don't know why I didn't stay on that page, but digital literacy. So there are different themes. And if you are a myologist in particular, or have any autoimmune, peripheral disease, neurology related, are interested in collaborating, please feel free to write. Open to questions.
Thanks a lot, Latika, for sharing your experiences. As expected, it was very informative and it was a brilliant talk. We, I think, greatly benefited from some of your insights. We will open it up for questions. So if anybody has any questions, they can raise their hand and then unmute themselves. So I'll start with the first question. So what is a platform that you found to be the most useful for conducting online surveys?
So my experience is mostly with SurveyMonkey. However, there are data protection issues with SurveyMonkey in some countries. Qualtrics is a very good tool as well and offers some more advanced functionalities, and many universities provide access to Qualtrics. Nowadays, most researchers in the West are leaning towards RedCap. It is good for database handling, and it is preferred in some countries.
So are these free? Like, I think SurveyMonkey is free as far as I know. Or do they have different pricing schedule for different functionalities?
Most of them have basic and advanced versions. SurveyMonkey has some access to some modalities for free, and then for advanced versions, you need a subscription. Most of the universities may also provide access to some kind of survey platforms in the West. And Google Forms is another, and Microsoft Forms are simple ones which people use sometimes. Microsoft Forms is quite user-friendly, but I think even logic function is available in Microsoft Forms.
Can you just elaborate on the logic function? I'm not sure I completely understand.
So logic function is, for example, we want to survey this group on the unmet needs of your organization. And then the first question is, because it's online, you can't control who fills it. So you ask them, are you a member of this? If they say no, then you ask them, why are you not a member? Or the first question can be, are you a neurologist? So depending on their answer, they're seeing a different branch of questions.
I understand that. Right. So it's a more layered sort of thing. So it has multiple branches, as what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because simple surveys might add the burden of questions if they go on asking, if you are not a member, why are you not a member? Then you'll have to insert an option, I am a member. But the person who is a member has already got irritated by that point because they think that it's,
Yep.
too much.
I think Jasmine has her hand raised. Jasmine, please go ahead.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for this beautiful lecture. We really gained a lot from this. My question is that what platforms and how did you reach out to maximum number of collaborators? What was your way of collaborating with maximum number of people around the world?
I would say my experience was more serendipitous because I published some early surveys and then those got noticed, and then people contacted me to design surveys or to assist with their surveys. Sometimes I was also contacted because of my access to SurveyMonkey. And as we did more, we were able to do even bigger studies. For COVID, it was hard to get responses during COVID. So we contacted collaborators from different regions who would be interested in that. and who would have access to local patient support groups. The people who were interested in patient-centered research. So very important domain is now patient-led research. That's an emerging area in the West, and we have many patient research partners who ideally should be there at the time of idea synthesis and project design. So we engaged with them as well. And like the Myositis Association is a very well-run organization. So if you contact them, they have a CEO, they have a research team, they will pilot test the survey, they will give you feedback. So we also contacted the European PARE community, which is patient of rheumatic diseases community, the chair of PARE. So I happen to have known him because we recorded a podcast together. So he tested the survey, gave feedback, and PARE endorsed it. So once it's ready, then PARE would share it. So this is how we engage. So it is a big project, getting in touch with people, and then it's also bringing value to them as well. Like if they are feeding in responses here, then they are also gaining access to collaboration with this data set. Tomorrow, if they want to explore any research questions, like the Sjogren's Foundation, they will be interested in knowing if vaccines are safe in Sjogren's syndrome versus other diseases, because it may be different. So effective communication is also the key. What will they get back in return? Are we going to feed them back the results? Is there a key person in their network? Maybe there's a Sjogren's researcher whom they know, whom they trust. And they say that if you fill the survey, maybe we'll be able to look at safety. So it is about developing those, networks and bringing value to the team.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So we are like, we should contact as many as organization, as many number of organizations in different countries to get access and data from various countries.
There are regulatory barriers in some countries. So if it is patient reported, then it can be easier because you don't have any need for local, cross those barriers. Or the other approach is if you want to do a physician-directed survey, then they can take their own approval, and because surveys are quick to approve. So you have a collaborator who's responsible for every country.
Thank you.
I have one more question on the responder rates. Now, the problem with many of these online surveys is probably you'll be disseminating them in various ways. Sometimes you may even use some social media sites. So how do you then, comment on the responder rates because you don't know the denominator there? And do the journals expect every time that you need to mention what the responder rate is?
It's again a fine balance, like how high impact factor you're wanting to go. So if you want to go to a very high impact journal, then it's important. And then you can have some tagged questions in the survey, like towards the end, like who signposted you to the survey? Is it this patient support group? If it's that patient support group, then you can just segregate and extract those. Like suppose we go to, World Myasthenia Gravis Society, and they have written MGS or whatever its name is. So so we know we just extract that many responses. We are just doing a paper on myasthenia. So we know this society had this many respondents and we compare. So it will be a smaller study, but more robust. Or if you don't have the denominator, that is a limitation of the study, you acknowledge it, be transparent, but you condense it into a letter to the editor if it's a novel research question like long COVID. I don't think anyone has published on long COVID and myasthenia gravis so far. So that will be important, and you can try to target a niche journal that works on myasthenia gravis, and they're likely to accept it.
Thanks. Do we have any more questions? You can type any questions also. I think, okay, that's Prabjot says it was a very good talk.
Prabjot was an intern, I think, in Harding, no? So I didn't know she's a neurologist.
Yeah, she's a neurologist now. She was in Bangalore now. She is somewhere up north. No, Hyderabad, I believe.
Oh.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Ajay. Hi, Dr. Latika.
So,
I'm a pediatric neurologist now.
We have nurtured so many neurologists in Harding.
Yeah.
So
It's a very nice.
they all saw your name and jumped right in.
But I think the topic was also very interesting because we hardly get any insights on how to actually design survey-based studies or cross-sectional studies. So, I mean, that's why we made time to attend this talk, and it was a very, very nice talk. So, really, thanks for spending out time and teaching us this.
Thank you.
Latika, just one last question. So, how the ethics part of it? Now, how rigorous is it supposed to be? Like you said, you can get an exemption as well. So how do you sort of go about it? Like suppose if you're doing a clinician, let's say practices, clinician-based practices, I'm just surveying what the doctor does. In that case, what kind of this thing would you need? Ethics.
So it again varies a lot in different countries. In India, there are the ICMR guidelines which are followed. And if it's anonymous survey, then as per ICMR guideline, it's exemption from review that you have to seek. If you're collecting identifiers, then you need to specify more how you will be handling these, and you'll take a full ethical approval. In some countries and centers, it is more stringent. Like Australia generally needs its own, New Zealand generally needs its own. So it can vary a lot. China, there are other barriers. So it depends. I think their platforms may also be slightly different. And you have to take local approvals. In the West, it depends. If it's a quality improvement project, for example, you're running your ESSR organization and you want to look at unmet needs. So it's a quality improvement project. So that would not need approvals as per local. So there is a checklist in some countries, like in England, you have an online National Health Research, NHR or something like that. It's a checklist available online. You just keep filling in the answers. If it is anonymous, it's a quality improvement project. It doesn't qualify as research because sometimes it doesn't qualify as research, but it is a survey. And you can publish it as research, but it's actually for quality improvement of an organization. So that doesn't require approvals.
Okay. Right. Thank you. I think we've come to the end of our time. So nice of you to dedicate some time for this. I'm sure all of us appreciated the great work that you've done with the cohort, and that's just one part of what you've done. There's so much more that you've done that we can all take inspiration from. Thank you so much, and I hope some of us are suitably inspired to join your collaborative work, especially people working on myositis. Please get in touch with Latika if that is what interests you. Thanks once again, Latika. I think it has been well appreciated. I'm getting a lot of messages on the chat box which says that they learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ajay. Pleasure is all mine. Nice to meet all of you. Bye.
Right. So we'll then end this session. Thanks once again, Latika, for joining us, and thank you all for joining in for this first webinar of 2024.